All right, and we're recording. So once again, welcome everybody. My name is Carl Hooker, and I am a former classroom teacher, taught first grade, taught fifth grade, done a lot of professional learning over the years, taught all sorts of levels, pre-K to 12 for the most part. I'm currently now an educational consultant, administrator, former tech director, done a little bit of everything, written some books, doing some podcasts, hosted poetry slams, you name it. I've tried to do it. That said, this session today, I'm excited to bring you, is called Swimming in the SAMR Pool, and it's a session that's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I've used to kind of center my work around technology integration over the years. It's got a lot of pedagogy in it, but it also talks a little bit about tools. So hopefully for those of you that are joining, if you're a teacher or if you're a coach, instructional coach, you'll get something out of this session, whether it be, like I said, a tool, an idea, a strategy, something that you can use either in your own classroom. I say in your classroom, it could be virtually as well. As we all know, the fall is going to be a little bit different. So I'm hoping to keep that as nimble as possible as we kind of go through it. And again, feel free to use the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that as well. As I see already that Becca mentions that they use SAMR for their curriculum planning. So that's awesome. So let's go ahead and use the chat before I get started. So I'm going to just ask those of you that have joined, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being, you've maybe heard one thing about the word SAMR, 5 being you could be the one giving this presentation. Go ahead and drop a number in the chat there and tell us, like, what ranking would you say you are in terms of familiarity with the SAMR model? And we'll see Becca is a 4 already. I guess they use it for curriculum planning, so some 3s. Oh, I like the 3, 4 there, kind of in between, Lori. Yeah, a little bit different. So it looks like you guys are fairly familiar with it. So I will kind of go through the beginning of what SAMR is and kind of speed through that part of it then, just because I know you guys are familiar with it. So we won't get too far deep into that. We'll actually spend more time on examples then. So I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of it. Now, other people are going to be watching this recording later, so I will give you kind of a quick rundown of what that looks like. So when it comes to new technology in the classroom, and a lot of times this could be, anything, any type of device. But I remember back when I started my teaching days at the turn of the century, that the smart board was starting to come from overseas. Like UK was starting to use the smart board, and a lot of people thought, well, we'll put this beautiful piece of technology on the wall, and it'll be amazing and transform everything with learning. But essentially, what it became was just another kind of a digital chalkboard, if you will. And so we saw the same thing with devices for a long period of time. In fact, when we started our one-to-one program in my district here in Austin, Texas, back in 2011, and it was one-to-one iPads. You can see there on the image. And the same kind of thing happened. The first thing we did when we introduced the new technology, a lot of teachers asked the question, will this device have my textbook on it? Because immediately your first inclination is to go to things that, like, what does technology do that could substitute for my everyday life? And so in doing research throughout that, I stumbled across this man. I call him Dr. SAMR, but he's actually Dr. Ruben Peuntedura, a great guy. I've got to know him very much over the years. I've seen him speak. We've had discussions together around a lot of things. And he's really been doing this research for more than about 30 years. So in the late 80s, when technology was kind of entering the schools with the ACOT program, those of you that remember the Apple Classroom of Tomorrow out there in California, he was really one of the first ones to kind of look at the impact of what that did in the classroom. And then when Maine started its one-to-one, the state of Maine started its one-to-one in 2001, 2002. He was there on the ground looking to see, like, what kind of impact was this having on the kids? What was it having on learning, professional development, a little bit of everything. And so, of course, he has this SAMR model that he introduced. And now there is a picture of me with him. I would call Ruben, he's kind of a South American Santa Claus, very jolly fellow, nice guy, but very, very smart, highly intelligent, always thinking kind of outside the box about ideas and ways and strategies to help with teaching and learning. So this is his model. And those of you that are listed in the chat that you're a 3 or a 4, you probably already know this. But basically, this is what the S, A, M, and R stand for. And we'll go through each one of these as we get to the specific actual examples. But what's interesting about this model, and one of the things that I struggled with early on in my career as an administrator was, we use this model too. I know that somebody mentioned in the chat they use it as a curriculum guide. And one of the problems I found was just the representation of the model. I mean, the model itself I like the words, I like the kind of the thoughts behind what they do with technology, but it almost looks like, you kind of have to cross this magical line. And then there's this kind of up arrow where it's like, you feel like it's a ladder, right? They call it the SAMR ladder. So it feels like you have to kind of climb up this ladder. And what happened, and this is a true story, in about 2014 or 15, when we started kind of rolling in with SAMR, we're one-to-one devices for 2 or 3 years, and really started to take off into that modification redefinition range, is that there were teachers. I had a 4th grade teacher text me once, and he goes, "Hey, Carl, guess what? I made it. I've reached the top. We did redefinition in our classroom today. The kids did this great project, and they blogged about it and global and da. And I thought, and he said, so I'm done. Now where do I go? And it's not really about climbing a ladder, which this model would indicate. And so I was talking with a colleague named Greg Garner, who is now out in North Carolina, and he and I were talking about it. And he said, it's almost like a pool. I said, you know what, you're right. Let's run with that. And so we started to kind of come up with different ideas, like how could it be more like a pool? Because it's not really about making it to the top of the ladder, but it's about, there's different types of learning that take place at different parts of the school day, and not all of that learning will involve technology. There's times when you don't have to actually be in the pool. There is times when it's substitution. There's times when you're doing that really high-end redefinition high dive. And I think what worked with what I liked about this model, and of course I ran it by Ruben too, and we talked about it, and I gave him my ideas behind it, and he enjoyed it too. He said he liked kind of the representation a little bit differently. Now you've seen all sorts of different SAMR. Now there's like the coffee cup SAMR model. There's the hamburgers model. I mean, there's all different SAMR models out there now. But this was back in 2013 when we did this, and it really resonated with our own staff too, because it made them know that like they didn't have to be in the pool all the time, but they also knew that there was different levels to it. And so we'll go into that just a little bit too. And so this was, I feel bad for my kids because they get to be examples in all my presentations, but this is my oldest daughter, Sophia, when she was about 4, and she's giving me the same look that I would say most of the staff in the school district gave me when I said, hey guys, we're going to hand devices out to all the kids. Good luck. And they're like, wait, you want me to do what? And I was like, yeah, that's right. Go out and dive in. It's fine. You haven't swam at all. Just figure it out. And so in her case too, the first thing you do with teachers is you don't just throw them in the deep end. Same with students. You got to kind of coach them up to that, right? And I feel like the SAMR model for us, that's what it was really about. It wasn't about being punitive. It wasn't about judging the way you're using technology in a poor way. It was more about let's use this as a model to assess how we're doing. And is there something we can do to make it a little more enriching, a little deeper when it comes to the integration with or without technology? And so we developed and thought about it on the lines of this pool here, and really started with substitution. Now, a few things about substitution. We'll go with Ruben's direct interpretation real quickly. Again, most of you are familiar with this, but I'll just kind of go through it. Technology is a direct substitute for any existing tool. And again, it has no real functional change. And before I ask a question to the chat, I'm just going to say this. I feel like it's somewhere along the lines, and Ruben's mentioned this too, is that it's somewhere along the lines when it came to his model, that substitution almost became a bad word in some ways. Like, well, you're just using technology as a substitute. I call it substitution shaming, as it were. Like, oh, you're just using it as a substitute. You know what? There are times when you use technology as a substitute, and that's fine. I think that the idea behind that you have to have everything as this amazing redefinition type lesson is not really attainable. There is times when you substitute with technology, and they're just like I mentioned before, there's times when you don't use it. So I think, let me start with that before I get into kind of this next question, and that is for the chat. What are some examples of technology substitutes? So again, hop into the chat there. I'm going to kind of keep an eye on it down here. And just give me some ideas. Those of you that are familiar with this probably already know several ideas in your head about what are some substitutions there. So give me some examples of just what are some tools that you use and what do they substitute for and how do they substitute. So I'll give you a second to kind of type those in there. I'll keep an eye in the chat. And again, if you just joined, feel free to go ahead and tell us who you are and then what you're doing, what classes you're in. And you may notice some numbers in the chat. People just listed kind of how familiar they were on a scale of 1 to 5 about the SAMR model. And we have some 3s and 4s in here today. So a lot of folks are fairly familiar with that. And hopefully you guys have been seeing my screen the whole time. I didn't even check that, but it looks like it's being shown on there. So that looks good. So yeah, go ahead and drop in and tell us again, what kind of, here we go. Got some questions coming in. Sway instead of a 3-panel project board. Ooh, interesting. I like it. Yeah. And Microsoft tools are great. Again, this is a chat with Microsoft, but again, if you have other ideas or other tools and you mention them, don't feel like you have to just leave it to Microsoft stuff. Obviously they're the ones supporting this. That's great. But yeah, Sway is Sway I just kind of got turned on to just recently, actually through use of another tool called Nearpod, which I'll mention later. And they have it kind of built in and embedded in their thing. But yeah, that's a great example, Becca, just saying like, I'm going to use Sway instead of the traditional 3-panel project board that you see kids do at all those science fairs in 4th and 5th grade. Having Sway as a different way of kind of looking at a project and kind of the way it comes across there. We'll give you guys about another minute, see if anyone else has any other examples they want to drop in the chat, about another 30 seconds, and we'll see. And I'm going to list a few here in just a minute. I just want to give you guys an opportunity to kind of state some ways that you've seen technology used as a substitute. And I would challenge you to say that not even in schools. I mean, think about how you use technology as substitutes in everyday life. There's lots of examples of that as well. So kind of be thinking on that as well. Flip grid videos is a way to students to share answers. That's a great substitute, especially now that we're virtual and you can't actually just call out to a class of physical kids and say, hey, who has the answer to this? And one kid raises their hand and tells you the answer. Now you're shouting that question out, so to speak, to a class of virtual students who can then reply. And the great thing, of course, with that tool that makes it a little more than substitution is that you can actually hear from every kid's voice, right, with Flipgrid, which is true. Editable PDFs, yep. Kind of like, well, we're going to have this paper and you're just going to change it or edit it. You can do that on paper. You can do it with an editable PDF of some sort. Yeah, and Becca mentions the great thing about Flipgrid. Again, probably moves it up to that augmentation level. Again, you'll notice kind of as we talk today that tools can vary along that timeline of SA, M, and R. It's really not about the tool. It's about how you're using the tool, right? So if you're using it as an example, Flipgrid for student voice, you're really giving kids an opportunity to really speak that they probably wouldn't have had that opportunity if you hadn't introduced the technology as a tool to do that. Yeah, and writing in a Google Doc, writing in a Word doc, writing in a word processing doc from similar writing, that's good. Hyperdocs, yep. A lot of different ways. These are things that you could probably organize in some form or fashion physically, but obviously using them as a using the technology tool, it allows it to be a little more nimble, a little lighter, so to speak. Our backpacks get a little bit better. Yeah, smartboard instead of a whiteboard. The classic, that's been around, and I mean, our schools still have them in a lot of ways. And now what we're doing is instead of buying the smartboards, I don't know if you guys are seeing this too, but there tends to be a trend into the interactive flat panels, right? That's the next thing. We're going to bring in, instead of a whiteboard on a wall, we're going to bring in a TV that you can also interact with. But we've seen that interaction has not been as high as it normally would be, you would think, because now that kids have devices in their hands, the learning seems to be happening more in their hands versus on the wall. So it's changed a little bit there. Yeah, so some good examples here. Here's one that someone mentioned down there in the chat, just using a Word doc or a doc. You could do this physically, you're actually writing in paper, but obviously when it's a document, you can actually do a little bit more to it. It gives you some of that ability. If you turn off all the features, like you turn off the autocorrect and all that, it is basically the same thing as writing with a pencil and paper, but it is a little bit different. It probably could stretch to augmentation on that too. No one mentioned this, but I mean, books, a physical book versus an ebook, there's lots of different, versions of that. You could also make an argument that an ebook could be technically augmentation, because really you're able to introduce tools like the book on the right. I can actually change the font. My own daughter, I have three girls, all with the last name Hooker. So yeah, pray for them. But that being said, my middle child, she has dyslexia, and so for her, reading a regular book with regular font is one thing, but there now is, the open dyslexic font that you can actually change a lot of text to online or in ebooks. And so that's actually helped her a little bit in terms of the sizing and the weight of the letter. So there's some accommodations there that make it a little bit better than substitution in that sense too. Lori mentions also that Seesaw allows for multiple ways to response multiple ways of responses, which address different learning modalities. Yeah, that's great. Just like we were talking about with dyslexia, lots of different opportunities to really express yourself. Immersive Reader is another good one. That's an overlay. Yeah, I've used that quite a bit over the years with my kids. And then someone mentioned the whiteboard, so I'll put that in here too. I don't know about you guys, but when I used to teach first grade a long time ago, imagine me as a first grade teacher, first of all, it's kind of crazy, but we used to use these little pocket charts, like the things you see there on the left. Little pocket charts. Kids would come in and they would move things around and do their little definitions. And then we got this whiteboard in. And so what did I do? I made the exact same thing basically into a whiteboard, where now you just grabbed a thing and dragged it over, or take attendance. It's a little interactive because you can hit a check button there. So it does let you do a little bit more. But for the most part, I just substituted what I had already known, right? And again, that's okay. I say I just substituted. That makes it sound like it was a bad thing. It's not. It's just it's the first step in a lot of ways when it comes to technology integration. We hold on to things that we know, and then we want to substitute them for something on the tech realm, just to see, like, okay, let's dip our toe in the water, so to speak, getting into that baby pool to start. So again, one of the challenges with substitution is you can only go so deep, and you'll notice that a lot with some of the tools you guys are even mentioning. I mean, you can get some responses, you can do a few things if you're editing a PDF, or if you're writing on a PDF versus like writing on a worksheet. You're only going to get so deep in terms of the knowledge and understanding with some of those tools and some of those strategies. So while you can still learn and the kid can still immerse themselves, they can't do quite as much. So here she is standing in the baby pool going, "Oh, this is great, Dad, but I can only do so much in this pool." That's true. To really stretch themselves, you have to go a little bit deeper, both literally and figuratively. And of course, you can't really dive in, right? Because it's kind of dangerous to just say, "Okay, kids, I'm just going to throw this technology out at you. Good luck. Figure out how it works." No, you got to use that substitution level to kind of really set up those groundworks and strategies in your classroom or outside of your classroom when it's virtual. So moving on to a little bit of augmentation here. And again, we'll go back to Ruben's direct definition of it. And augmentation really is technology as a substitute, but with some functional improvement. So now some of the tools you mentioned earlier in the chat and some of the ones we mentioned on the previous examples could fall into this realm. Technology used as an advantage for learning. Again, so all of a sudden you're starting to see it kind of turn corners. Our big win in our school district, I remember there was a day, and it was a few years in, and our high school was really was challenging at first because they were really struggling with the idea of, I've been tried and true, I've taught this way forever. Why change, right? And they've been ultra successful. Westlake High School, one of the most successful high schools in the country, and they said, now you're introducing this change. Why do I do it? And so for some teachers, they really need to see that advantage for learning. They need to see, like, is it saving them time, but it's also giving them feedback quickly on student growth. And so some of the first examples, the first wins we saw was things like using a form, right? In this case, is a Microsoft form or Google form, whatever kind of forms you might use. There's also Socrative and GoFormative, Kahoot, all these different ways to get quick and instant feedback. So if you imagine back in the olden days, I guess, so to speak, not that old, but not too long ago, like when I was teaching, if I taught multiple courses at, say, a middle school, and I'm teaching maybe 120 kids throughout the day with all my course load, I'm quizzing all those students on whatever the content is. Well, I have to take home, 120 quizzes. I drive them home, drag them back in that big giant crate that you carry with you. And then I go home, watch Dancing with the Stars, and try to grade the papers, right? So as I'm sitting there grading these papers, I'm thinking, oh, these kids really missed this concept, or they didn't get this one thing. So I go back the next day and I change my teaching to kind of adapt based on what they're learning, assessment for learning. And the problem with that is that I've now lost a significant chunk of time because it's taken me 24 hours to get home, do all that, and figure that out, and maybe even longer. Maybe it was over a weekend. And so, I've missed some golden opportunities right there to adjust on the fly. And so for those teachers that were reticent to use technology or reticent to really start to really integrate it in their classroom, I found that using the light quizzing apps and the light forms to really get that first kind of 5-minute pre-check was a huge win. There was teachers that were very excited about using that because instantly they knew that within the first 5 minutes of class, wow, I know exactly how my student is doing. I know that 20% of you have no idea what this concept is because you totally missed it. So I'm going to hit that 20% a little bit harder. And then, or maybe the whole class missed a complete concept. So I need to start over and reteach it. So that gave them that instant feedback. It really helped them kind of win. That's that augmentation at use. I mentioned the ebooks before. Again, lots of different tones. You can change it to sepia, black, all the different things you can do now with Immersive Reader, with not just Immersive Reader, the app, but also all the different types of ebook applications out there. Most of them, Kindle, whatever you use, have some sort of adaptation where you can change the font, change the size, change the color, and all of that, which definitely helps with reading styles, as someone mentioned in the chat, the different learning modalities, which I think is a great way to think about it. Another one that we found that was pretty successful, this is in math. In math was also an area, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this as well, but we feel like a lot of times math teachers were the ones that were the hardest to kind of bring on board, I guess, so to speak, with technology integration. A lot of times there's like, well, we do our kind of lessons on the board, and then they're going to repeat what we just did on the board, and then they're going to practice. And that was kind of like that's kind of the flow of the classroom in what I would call a traditional math classroom. But we've seen a lot of innovative things come out of this on the math side. And so this one particular tool, ThingLink, is it integrates with Microsoft, but it's a third-party tool, so it does a lot of different things. You can log in with lots of different platforms. Desmos is another one that someone mentioned, and GeoGebra. And I'll just kind of drop out of this real quick and go to a screen share and show you Desmos, not Desmos, but ThingLink, those of you that haven't seen it. And I'll show you a little bit about Desmos too. Let me share back this other window real quick. So if you haven't, ThingLink's been around. It's one of those tools that I say is ancient. It's not really ancient. It's been around for like 5 years, which in tech terms can be forever. So I want to give full shout out and credit here. This is Mathy Kathy, and she is an amazing math teacher. She taught in my school district when I was there, and she still teaches there. She's Kathy Yenka, but you can find her at Mathy Kathy on Twitter. And what she's done is she's basically gone through, and she used this as part of her classroom. What's great about this, by the way, is that she used this in her physical classroom for the last several years. And so guess what happened when everything went virtual? Boom, flick of a switch. She was able to use these same platforms in a virtual sense. And so in some ways, she's added a lot more to the fact. If you just search for Mathy Kathy and ThingLink, you'll see all the stuff I'm scrolling through. She's pre-built a lot of this stuff already. But again, ThingLink, it's web-based. So that means what? That means any device, right? As long as you have internet, Any device can get access to these things. How is this different than substitution? Well, so let's say you walked into a math classroom and you saw this on the board, right? Remember the bulletin boards? Like you put a bulletin board and it has this, what is a function? And that's great. And maybe you put some sticky notes up to kind of explain some things. But now that it's interactive and online, these little buttons can actually lead to other things. So if I want to actually watch a video on what that is, you couldn't do this on a dry erase board or on a bulletin board, right? So this is explaining how functions work.
It takes an input, performs one or more mathematical operations on the input, and produces an output.
So lots of different, again, those of you that have used ThingLink in the past, it allows you to do some overlays with text. And I don't know if you guys can see that there. You may not be able to see it as well. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. So all these little hot buttons really give you kind of the idea behind it. So what she's done is she's built basically an image, and using any type of image file you want to make, I mean, any type of image creator, Canva, whatever, PowerPoint, you can actually drop in an image and then have it, and then she's basically just tagged this with all the text functions. So again, augmentation, right? Because it's still very teacher-centered, but it's also giving them kind of a little bit of interactivity that the technology affords you in terms of that interactivity. And someone mentioned Desmos. Desmos, if you guys do or don't know this, Desmos is not just for math folks, because Desmos actually has quite a bit of functionality built in when it comes to lots of different things. The one of my favorites that they use is the polygraph. If you guys are not familiar with that, check out Desmos Polygraph. I don't have it in this presentation, but it allows you to drop in images, and usually it's used for graphs or math and things like that. But it actually allows you to drop in images where you can go in and actually say, like, okay, it's almost like the 20 questions thing where you say, okay, true or false. You know, and the one I've seen that it's a friend of mine who did this, she did with the presidents, where she said, where it was presidential history. It's like, was this president in the 19th century or before? And then it sends the response automatically to another student's device who's joined. This could be in the classroom or it could be remotely. And that kid has to say yes or no. And then basically they can eliminate based on the questions. So it kind of encourages critical thinking with students, not just with math, like I said, because it allows you to upload images, which means you could do it about anything. It could be about words in a foreign language. It could be about different settings in a story. It could be about just about anything. So again, that's another good one, Desmos, free and web-based, which I always am a big fan of when it comes to free. Being a former tech director, of course, I look for those free projects as much as we can. So let me go back to here. And now we've reached the kind of that shallow end of the pool, so it's a little bit deeper. You know, our students have to be a little bit more protective. You know, they can do a little bit more. They can do those upside down handstands. They can do a little bit more with technology. Got to have those goggles on. But I'm going to ask you this question, and that is, a lot of you mentioned some of this already in the chat with some of the substitution tools, and maybe it's the same thing you just mentioned in the chat. But what are some tools that you use to augment learning in your classroom? I would say in, and now I could say or out of your classroom. So again, tools that you feel like, this is something that I could do physically in the classroom, but it would be really hard, and technology makes it a little bit easier. So what are those big wins? What are those tools that you've used? And I've mentioned a couple, but go ahead and drop in the chat there and see if there's some things you've mentioned. I see we've got some other folks that have joined us. Becca, we got Becca in there, Lori, Maria, awesome. Yeah, an immersive reader, which was mentioned earlier, I think would probably fall into this category too, is a great example of something that can augment learning, right? It allows you to kind of overlay different things on websites. It lets you do a lot. It lets you actually have the website read back to you. I mean, there's things like that for our struggling readers. It does some adjustments, I believe, in terms of Lexile level too. So again, some great tools in there as well. Let's see if anyone else is dropping anything in the chat. I'll give you guys a minute there. Make sure we're doing okay on time too. All right, so I can tell you guys are quiet in the chat. I'm going to leave it open, keep an eye on it, but I'll keep trucking along here because what I want to do next is going to be a little bit interesting, and I've never tried this before. So we're going to try this live, actually recorded live, because sometimes it's time for a pull break. Yes, thank you, Becca, multimedia docs and hyperdocs. So sometimes it's time for a pull break, and when it comes to technology, I always say it's good to take those breaks. And now in a day and age where our kids may have to be looking at their screens quite a bit, right, for learning, teaching and learning, whether it be doing a Microsoft Teams call, Zoom, whatever, that you need to make sure that you're building in that time for breaks too. So I've used this, I've talked about this for almost a decade. It's in the classroom when you're using technology, you can kind of tell, right? You can tell when kids their eyes kind of fade a little bit. They're getting a little fidgety. Those of you that teach adults probably know the same thing. You've seen it as well. They also need those breaks. And so Yeah, Go Noodle is a great example of that. Becca, she brings that up too. I'm going to do one here. It's not a Go Noodle, but here's what I'm going to do. It's actually called, and let me tell you a little bit about the research and then I'll get into this. If you've ever seen me talk ever, I probably show this slide on most of my talks, my keynotes, even during a keynote in front of a couple thousand people, I will stop everything and make everyone stop and take a little brain break, because the truth is the human brain, the adult brain, especially, you're talking 18 to 20 minutes of serious, like just direct instruction and lecture before your brain has to do something different. And that's on average. So some folks, it's even less than that. Kids, by the way, those of you, I saw some of you teaching 3rd grade, 4th grade, you're talking about the age of that kid, right? So 8 minutes, 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 5 minutes if you're a kindergarten teacher. That's about how long you've got of just some sort of direct instruction before you start really losing them, right? So you got to figure out ways to build in those breaks. And so we're going to do this one here, and it's called Look Around. And I've never done this before. I've only done it once in a physical crowd, but I'm going to try it virtually. So I'm going to drop out. And if you have the ability to turn on your camera, I would ask you to do that. So let me get out of the screen share here. And I promise you don't have to say anything. All you have to do is I'm just going to need to see you so I can see that you're doing it. So turn on your camera. Okay, some of you thank you. I can see some faces. This is good. All right, Becca is the only brave one so far that's done it. So this is only going to take less than a minute. And you don't even have to move, but yes. Oh, you will have to move, but you don't have to stand up. If you want to do it sitting, you can. I'm going to do it sitting because if I stand up, you'll just see my waist, and you'll get to see that I'm wearing shorts under this. Let's see who else. Oh, do not have a camera on a PC. All right. So if you don't have a camera, I'm gonna trust that you're gonna do this along with us. All right. So I guess Becca, you and I are gonna be the ones that do it. So here's how it's gonna work. For this brain break, I'm basically going to just say a word. Now, this is something you can do with your kids too. Of course, it's great if you can see them all on the screen because you can see if they're doing it. So I'm going to say basically 4 directions. I'm going to say up, down, left, and right. And so whenever I say it, oh, good, we got someone else who's joined us. Awesome. So when I say the word up, we're going to look up. When I say the word down, we'll look down, kind of at our toes, left, and then right. Okay, you ready? So we're going to try that again. And then I'm going to change it just a little bit. I'm going to tweak it just a little bit. So here we go. Up, down, up, down, left, right, left, right. Okay, good. Now for the tweak. Here we go. So now I'm going to change up and down are going to mean the opposite. Okay, so when I say up, you're going to do what? Down, right. And then when I say down, you're going to up. Okay. Now, to make it even more challenging, left and right will remain the same. Okay. Becca looks scared. It's okay. It's okay. Here we go. All right. So let's start with left, right, up, oh, down, right, up, oh, down, and left. All right, good job. Give yourselves a round of applause there. That was a little brain break, it's called up, down, look around. Thank you guys for joining in with your camera for a minute there, just so I could see some faces. It's always good to see that someone else is on the other side of the screen. So yes, very nice. Yeah, so I think having those brain breaks built in, I think is an important part of this. And I think that's kind of something that I would say a lot of you mentioned. Go Noodle is a great one too, because you can put it up on the screen. It does like 5 minutes. They dance around. Kids can get up and kind of get their wiggles out. I would say if you're teaching older kids, it's always, of course, a challenge, right? You want to make sure those brain breaks are a little more meaningful. They could be things like, talking about analogies. I want you to find something that's blue. And then, kind of the scavenger hunt idea. Then they have to find a book that's blue that, matches their personality or something like that. Here's my Harry Potter book that just happens to be sitting there. So I'll hold that up. Or find a photo on your phone, that actually brings you joy. Those kind of things, like having them hold us up to the screen. Different ways to kind of get the kids to interact, even just for that 1 minute. Like that took us less than a minute, but it was just quick. It got you moving, got you thinking, got you doing something differently. Ideally, we would all be standing up when we do it, but again, always a little bit tricky. Yes, Lori, good job there too. You nailed it. Becca, you and I both, I for a minute hesitated. I went down even when I said down, I still started looking down because I think it's in our brain, right? And that actually is a great brain break just to talk about learning and unlearning things. I don't know if you've ever seen the reverse bicycle. That's another good one I've seen that's been out there for a while. It's a video that came out a long time ago about the guy that flipped the bicycle handlebars. So when you turn left, you actually turn right. When you turn right, you actually turn left. And it took forever for people to figure out how to ride this bike because it was so hard your brain is just wired a certain way. And even that simple challenge there of up, down, doing this in a full class or doing it in a Zoom, if you do it faster, I didn't do it very fast, but if you speed it up, you'll see people kind of just going all around in circles. So they start to kind of lose it a little bit, but it gets them kind of thinking differently. So again, as I say down there at the bottom of the model, you may notice, don't forget a pull break. Same thing, right? What happens if you've been in a swimming pool too long? You get sunburn, your fingers get pruny. You need to take those breaks every now and then. So I think the same would hold true for technology. So for those of you that are teaching synchronous this fall, you're teaching all day, or you're having to have your kids kind of up and like say, okay, I'm going to be in front of my kids from 8 to 3 o'clock. I don't know many schools that are doing that, but some may require you to have those longer sessions. I would encourage you, even in a longer session, if you're doing a 75-minute to 90-minute session, take a few breaks in there. Let them have 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be what I just did. It could be, hey guys, take 5 minutes, go walk outside, come right back. We're going to keep this open. You just jump back in 5 minutes and start a little timer, play some music. And when the song is done, they have to come back, right? So that gives them some opportunity to take those breaks. You're going to have to do that, especially for those of you that are teaching synchronously in the fall. Some modification, we're moving on up. Now we've gone past that deep end, right? So you see that little magic line there. Things are getting a little trickier with technology now, right? When all of a sudden kids can do a little bit deeper, but it also means that what happens when you get into that deep end, what could also happen to kids when it comes to technology, is that it becomes a little more dangerous. And like with swimming, if you get in the deep end, now you can drown. With technology, you're giving them a little bit more control, which means they're going to have a lot more creative freedom. But at the same time, with that control comes great responsibility, right? So you got to kind of be careful about that. And thank you, by the way, thank you, Becca, for dropping in the chat from sciencealert.com that video. Perfect. So again, let's go to Ruben's direct definition here, and that is technology allows for significant task redesign and collaboration. So now all of a sudden, whereas before the technology was kind of giving you a little bit of an advantage, now you're starting to actually redesign your lessons and redesign your learning, and it's becoming much more student driven. I feel like the second you cross that line, the second you go into that deep end, as a teacher, your role really shifts. You are no longer the one that's just, what they call the sage on the stage. You're not even really the guide on the side. You're more of the mentor in the center. You're starting to kind of you're letting kids kind of drive and go to their own learning, which on John Hattie's research talks about how when students own their own learning, that's one of the most significant indicators of actual learning and retention. So that's a powerful thing when you start adding this level of modification. Again, you don't start the first day of school like this. You don't say, hey guys, here's everything, go figure out how to do it. You build this up over time. So again, going back to a tool that we mentioned earlier. So here we have, this is Microsoft Word, and this is Microsoft Word Online. So now all of a sudden you see that, again, could be used as a substitution tool, could be used as an augmentation tool. And now it could also be used as a modification tool, because what we're doing is we're having students actually have some dialogue online to actually do some peer edits and peer reviews. And again, a lot of the great thing about all this is there's some control mechanisms, but you can also see who is doing the changing, who's doing the editing, those kind of features, which I think are also kind of powerful as a teacher to see insight. Because back in the olden days, again, I keep saying that, I feel I've aged myself quite a bit during this presentation, but when I used to teach, it was, you three are doing a group project, and what inevitably happens is, one person sort of takes the lead and takes a lot of the weight of the project, or you may have like the one student is just like, oh, this is great, I'm going to let them run with it, and I'll kind of coast on their coattails. Well, now we can kind of track that. And so using tools like this, you can actually see who's putting in the work. So as a teacher, I know that like it was fairly distributed, or who was doing most of the research, most of the writing, or how did they distribute the work. But again, you're giving some onus of control to the students at this point. This is an example. This is a classroom I work with. I actually do some consulting with the district. This is outside of Chicago, Western Springs. And this was actually a math, this was a foreign language teacher at middle school, mind you. It was a Chromebook district, and they're doing Quizlet. Now, Quizlet, we could have put in the other category as well. It could be augmentation. It could be even substitution. And in this case, the reason why it's modification is she did something a little different. So what you're seeing there is she had the students actually create the phrases in Spanish. And then what it was a family tree. And so what happens is there's a student sitting on the other side of the screen. So you can't really see them because I cut off their head a little bit there. You just see his shorts and kind of sneakers underneath the desk. But essentially what happens is they have to ask him questions in Spanish, and then he has to reiterate his answers in Spanish to get them to know what the right answer is. So they're practicing conversational Spanish while also, doing the Quizlet on their devices, which is kind of a fun, game where you can learn kind of together and collaboratively. So I like that little slight adaptation, because Quizlet usually is everyone's going to be on a team together, and they may shout out the answers to each other and figure out what the right answer is or who's got the right answer. But in this case, they all have to be conversing also in the foreign language, which is kind of neat. Another one that I like to share, this is a third grade teacher who used Book Creator in not the traditional sense. And she kind of turned it on its head in a sense that she approached me and said, hey, I'm looking for different ways. They do these math stations in her classroom, and they're using tools like IXL and Reflex Math, kind of like little sit and get stations in her classroom. And she says, I really want to take that to the next level. I don't want it to be just augmentation. She wanted to kind of move it to modification. And so I said, you know what, let's look at ways, how can we let the students drive a little bit more of this? And so we were kind of dabbling around, and we got into Book Creator, which, language arts teachers have probably known about for a while. It's a great tool. It's online, web-based. You can use it with anything. Got some limitations in terms of the paid versus the free, but you can still do something with the free version even. And so what she had the kids do was she had them actually create story problems. These are actual screenshots because I'm one of the co-teachers in this class. So I didn't edit any of this, so you can see the typos, guys. This is 3rd grade, mind you. Also the kind of garish font and background colors pops. Kids, if you worked with kids, especially in 3rd grade, 2nd grade, they want to just goof around with the colors at first. So we let them get through that, and they said, all right, now you're doing triple digit addition or triple digit subtraction. We need you to create a story problem that actually goes along with it. And so they would create the story problem. They would create a graphic, and then they would leave a blank page. And then on the next page following that, when you turn the page digitally, they would actually have an example of their answer. And in this case, this student just did an analog version where she said she took up a whiteboard and wrote out the answer and how she solved it. But then what was cool about this was that all these books lived on a shelf, a virtual shelf, and then all the other students in the classroom could see it. And so then at that moment, the students realized, wow, we can see each other's. And so by leaving that gap page where there was no answer, the other students had to go through and solve each other's problems. And you want to talk about students really trying to test each other. They made these problems probably 10 times harder than what they would have gotten on, say, an assessment, right? Because they really wanted to push each other to see who had the trickiest problem to figure out. And that really gave them that sense of student ownership, that collaboration element again. And you could technically do some of this physically. You could have like a journal where you have something written on one page. But again, the interactivity of this, the fact that the kid could actually put an audio file on this. In Book Creator, you can drop in audio to explain it. So again, for our struggling readers, they can listen to it, listen to kind of the problem spoken out to them. You can use your camera, you can use a whiteboard, you can use a drawing tool. So lots of different things. You can use little stamps and things like that to kind of represent the math problem. So I thought this was a neat way to kind of, again, turn math on its head. Because people generally think, just like I mentioned, Desmos, everyone thinks is a math tool. It's not necessarily. Book Creator isn't necessarily a language arts tool. It can be used in lots of different ways. Becca, thank you, by the way, for letting me feel a little bit better there about these. She started with dial-up modems, ASCII files, and Apple IICs. Yeah, that was back in the day. Mine was compact. Compact computers is what we used. Some other examples of modification that some of you may be using already in your classroom. Of course, virtual field trips. God, they really blew up on the scene probably about 3 or 4 years ago. In terms of just the ability to access things virtually. Now, virtual comes in lots of different fashions. So I'll clarify this too, because I mean, just because it's virtual reality, it's really 4 different experiences. So the standard experience you would probably would see is like if someone had their laptop and they were able to kind of move around with their mouse and see things kind of at a virtual sense, like looking at Google Earth and kind of looking around and seeing what there is out there. And then the next level would be something like taking a tablet, like an iPad or something, and holding that up and being able to actually physically move around and see things a little bit differently. So it gives you a little bit different experience, and actually your brain synapses fire at a different rate when you're holding up something and moving it around versus actually just clicking and dragging with a mouse. So that's level 2 of virtual reality. Level 3 would be taking like a phone or an old phone and putting in one of those cardboards. You've probably seen those little cardboard holders, or like Google Expeditions does it. I know Nearpod's got one. And so essentially you're doing some sort of virtual reality where it's now up on your face. And so it seems a little bit more immersive. And then the 4th one is actually taking a tool like HTC Vive or an Oculus, one of those things that actually is like a fully immersive experience where you can move around and interact with things using controllers and whatnot. So even though you say, oh yeah, I've done virtual reality, there's lots of different layers of virtual reality. So know that kind of going in. This is an example I've shared before, but this is me when I substitute taught my daughter's 1st grade classroom. So I know a lot of you out there are teachers, but if you're an administrator watching this too, I'll just quick sidebar here. I feel like it's important as administrators that you guys go into the classrooms, not only just to observe, but I think it's important to also teach. And it's something that I always did every single year when I was an administrator in the classroom. By the way, I still do it even as a parent volunteer. I volunteer and substitute teach my daughter's classes because I have a teaching certificate. And so I think it's important as an administrator to do that, because now like we're putting all this technology in the hands of kids, but do we really know what impact it has? And do we really know what the problems are? And I'll be honest, this lesson you're about to see, this is a Nearpod lesson. This is a few years ago. Nearpod was pretty clunky. We had a hard time getting into it. And when I launched this lesson, the whole Wi-Fi went down. And and the first thing I did and I'm the tech director, right? And I'm like, who do I call to fix this? And can't call myself. So what am I going to do? So again, it's letting me know like how to troubleshoot it. And then what's amazing about that experience is this is a group of 6-year-olds you're about to see. And what I asked them, I said, what do we do, guys? What do we think we should do? And it's amazing the troubleshooting skills that 6-year-olds have too. If you just opened up your mind to that and say like, guys, I don't know why, but the Wi-Fi, this doesn't seem to be working. And one kid's like, why don't we all close down and relaunch it? Why don't we restart our iPads? And I was like, wow, okay, let's try it. And so probably within the course of that 10 minutes of us rebooting things and kids trying different things, everything came back online. So it worked out well, but it was great because the kids all of a sudden felt excited. They're like empowered when everything came back online. So again, a little side note there about owning it as a leader as well. So this is us doing, of course, a virtual reality lesson. This is in Nearpod, and they have the 360-degree cities, which is a free kind of addition to Nearpod. Nearpod free, also paid. You can do some things for free. You have a limit in terms of size, but you can do a few of them. And again, I love this just again because it allows the kids to kind of walk around, to move around the room, spin around in circles, answer questions. And so this example is a kind of a hybrid in some ways because it's modification in the sense that they're going on a field trip. But now look what just happened. All of a sudden it became it came augmentation because I just pushed a question out to them. So now I'm kind of using it in 2 different ways. And of course, I always love this picture of this kid. My teacher took a picture of this. Like, look at this, how into it. He's just like totally immersed into what's happening there. So again, giving them that different experience in virtual reality and what it looks like when you actually look around at a space. And these are places that kids can't go to. Of course, now everything's virtual. So we're all going to be taking virtual reality field trips probably in the next few months. But the good news is there's a lot of this out there. So Nearpod isn't the only one. I would say, Round Me is another good one. ROUNDME is another good one that has free web-based ones. ThingLink, which I mentioned earlier, now has a ton of 360-degree look-arounds where you can basically click on different icons and see different little things kind of spit out at you and read about it. So lots of different virtual reality tools out there. And I don't know if you guys are out there have done it. If you have, you can drop some in the chat, some different things you've done with virtual reality, but another great way to do it. This is one that I've used, just been around the last couple of years, and this is virtual reality kind of another level. And this is, again, modification because these are things that you can't really do. It's kind of altering the form of what you're doing with your lesson. And so we've taken, in this case, I'll give you an example of what I was doing with this one. This was my daughter's 4th grade class last year. We were doing doing haunted houses, kind of like designing your haunted house. There's some math behind it. Figuring that thing and getting, kids can be as creepy as they wanted to be within range, within reason. But what we did with this is we use this panaform.com, which is a free website that essentially lets you download this grid. You can see the grid on the screen. You download that grid. You can either download it and have it as an image, it's editable, or you could actually have them print it, which is what we did. So let's see here. You can actually see what's going to happen. So I've now drawn it out. This is my haunted house, and I'll play the video here so you can kind of see what it looks like, but then uploaded it into Panaform, and now it becomes a virtual reality kind of experience. Virtual reality haunted houses. Good one. So what it's doing is it's taking that image and it's wrapping it into a virtual reality kind of concept. So again, student-led, student-created, students are collaborating on different ideas behind it. And then I've even had, since I presented this a few times to folks, I've even had other people say they've done adaptations of this too, where they take like a Word document or PowerPoint or something and expand it to where it's kind of super short, but also very wide and like almost like an infographic laid on its side. And doing that as an image and uploading it into Panaform, guess what? It works the same. So you could actually have kids design something on a virtual slide and then upload it into panaform.com. And then basically it becomes a virtual reality where they can look around, again, with whatever device they happen to have. And it's web-based and free. Again, things that I keep repeating over and over again, but I like about that. CoSpaces EDU is another one. This is, again, higher level, different level in terms of modification. I don't know how many of you have used CoSpaces. Freemium, web-based, it can be used on any device. But essentially, it's the idea that you can now drop things into this, have actual design, have 3D designed images that are virtual reality. Kids can program and encode them. I would say your ideal age range here, 3rd grade through about 6th or 7th. So like in this case, they're actually mimicking, recreating a story, Hansel and Gretel. You can actually program it. The one thing I'll say about this is it does take a little bit of time in getting used to. And as a kid, kids actually have no problem kind of going through this. Certain kids, this will fly with. If you have that kid who's like that programming coding kid who just loves this stuff, this is a great way for them to present some information in a different way versus just like, all right, do a PowerPoint slide on how to do this. So they're actually programming it to where every time you click on things, certain things are interacting. They created this entire story and recreated it with programmable links. So every time you click on something, something else happens. Like there, she just knocked the witch into the thing. So creating the scenes, everything, it's pretty impressive. So that's, again, CoSpaces EDU, free. Just be aware, it takes a while. All that stuff you saw there looks amazing. That didn't happen in a day. It takes a couple of weeks to build that level of programming. So I would think that for those certain kids that are like, man, they just want to kind of stretch and explore, it's a great opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to assign you this in CoSpaces. You can create a class for free, and you get, I think it's 30 students in a class. So essentially there's a join code, and they just sign up, and they're able to kind of do and build out on that as well. Great for ELA. Someone mentions, yeah, in the chat, they could illustrate a setting from their book, story, walk around as a character. And yeah, imagine that. I mean, just actually being immersed in it and saying you don't have to go and film it or create costumes or things like that, which is also a fun way to do it. You can do it with puppets, lots of hands-on things, or go into CoSpaces and actually just recreate the setting. So quick couple things about CoSpaces. One is the free version has a limited amount of icons that you can use. However, you can upload. So you can upload any image you want. So think about that as students. Like, you know what? You don't have the background you want, draw the background you want, take a picture of it with your webcam or with your phone or whatever, and then upload that. And now you've got a virtual background that they can actually build on top of. So that's another interesting idea there. Yeah, cospaces.edu. Thanks for dropping it in there. That was CoSpaces EDU. There's a regular CoSpaces too, but I've only used the EDU version of it. And if I have a moment, well, I don't have enough time, so I was going to try to show you a couple of quick examples of what I've done. If you've ever, one more tip about virtual reality and in any of these, if you ever go somewhere and you actually, when we physically can actually leave our houses, which who knows when that'll be, take your phone and use the panoramic feature, because what you can do with those images is you can use those in places like CoSpaces and Panaform to actually upload and make kind of a virtual background. And so what we did with my own kids is we went on a tour of the Smithsonian last summer, which of course are free museums there in DC. And I took a whole bunch of panoramic photos, and then I used those in CoSpaces. And so I was able to, upload a panoramic of like the prehistoric exhibit. And then I had the students actually programmed different things. So when you hovered over or clicked on things, it popped up. It's a neat way to kind of take field trips to the next level. So when we get to a point where we're actually taking field trips, again, think about that. Take some panoramic pictures, because you can use those in lots of different ways. And then, yeah, Panaform is a lot less labor intensive. Yes, good point there. So CoSpaces is kind of the Rolls Royce of what you would say building your own virtual worlds. Panaform is probably just, I wouldn't call it a Pinto, but it's definitely a lot easier mode of travel. Maybe it's a Ford Escort. I'm not sure in terms of that analogy. I don't know where I'm going with that, so forgive me. Anyway, when it comes to modification, your role as a teacher has definitely changed. Here's a picture of me this summer. I'm hoping you're laughing out there because I can't hear you. No, that is not me. But your role now becomes that of a lifeguard in a lot of ways, right? In a classroom that has modification to the fullest extent, students are swimming, they're out there doing their things with technology, and you're kind of keeping an eye and monitoring what that looks like. So I'm going to skip through this, and I want to make sure we get to the end. But we've mentioned some tools that inspire student creativity. Kind of keep those in the back of your mind. And again, it in a lot of ways, I don't like to make it about the tool or the app, because I feel like it's how you use it, right? We showed Microsoft Word earlier. It could totally be used in different ways, and it could even be used in a redefining way. So it's just about how you're using those tools. So speaking of redefinition, yeah, we've reached our little our high board there, where we're going to jump into this thing here. So we don't start off on the high dive, right? We want to make sure that we've built our students up to this point. But Ruben's definition says that redefinition is technology that allows for creation of new tasks previously inconceivable. I always think of Princess Bride when I say that. Student-led, authentic learning through voice and choice, and then published with a global audience is kind of an optional thing there. I would say that that's usually what you see with redefinition that's published. Not always though, but I think the big thing is student-led, that authentic voice and choice. Not the hey, we're going to do a mock activity about something, but it's an actual activity that has real impact. So you're having the kids actually create things that help the local community or solving a problem out there in the world, where kids are actually trying to design solutions to help with that. So here's a couple of quick examples that I'll give you, and then I'll kind of give you a quick rundown of the whole thing from the beginning to end. This is actually a school in California that did this. They were having, it was a middle school architecture class, I believe. No, this was actually a sophomore architecture class. And what they did was yeah, this is kind of design thinking at the next level. It's, as Lori mentions in the chat, they this rural community didn't have access to experts, and so what did they do? Well, they brought in an expert architect on Microsoft Teams to really interact with the students. And then what they did is the students had to design their projects. They used PowerPoint Online, and then guess what? Because they did it on PowerPoint Online, they were able to connect that with the actual architect who had zoomed in, not zoomed in, but Teams in or video chatted in, as you will. And kind of use that as a collaborative opportunity there, because a lot of these folks are also working from home now, right? So they're at home and they're able to kind of jump into classes for 10 or 15 minutes, phone a friend, phone an expert. And then what's really neat is you take that to the next level. And so this is great, and this is modification. But to go really to redefinitions, like how do we outwardly present this as something that solves a problem or as some sort of published to a global audience? And so what this particular student did is they used Bulb, which is a digital portfolio. It does integrate with Microsoft, and it's got a lot of free features too. Again, free, web-based. I love all that. Bulb is an amazing, like kind of an external portfolio tool. And so what she did, this is Yasmin, and what she did is she basically designed her actual physical models and then used Bulb to kind of take photos of it, journal it, talk about the process, talk about that. So again, process over product, but in a outward facing way. This particular student, this was in 2016, I think, when she posted these, she's actually used these as part of her portfolio to get into an art design school. So it's not just we're going to do this little activity for fun, but she actually used it. It motivated her. She was able to put together and get an internship out of this. In fact, if you saw at the beginning of the video, you may notice that there's her actually in the top border there. She's actually interning with an architect. And this is some of the examples of things that she worked on as part of that portfolio. So again, taking it to kind of that next level, using all of these tools and really redefining things you're doing, things you couldn't have done previously. It would have been really hard to get an expert if you're living in the middle of nowhere, and saying like, how do I get an expert in here? How do I intern? How do I do any of that? But now we have technology that allows that kind of reach or collaboration, if you will. This is less of an educational example, except for music ed, I would say. But I don't know how many of you are familiar with Eric Whitaker and his virtual choir. But these are always incredible. I think he just released a new one that was like 17,000 voices, just came out in the last couple of days. But if you look at these are all incredible. So basically what Eric does is he goes out there and he posts these, he basically posts himself kind of conducting an orchestra, if you will. And then what he does is he sends this out, and then the global community can pick up the notes. They see him conducting kind of there on the black screen in the middle. And then what happens is they start singing the song into their microphones. And so you've got people from all over the world in different languages basically collaborating. And then what he does on the back end is he uses his graphics team and kind of and the audio team, and they kind of sync it all up. But these are actual these are just people. These aren't like opera singers from around the world. These are people just in their homes. Some of them in closets, some of them like in their bathroom, wherever they could find a quiet space, some of them with just earbuds, some of them with real professional mics. But essentially all of them are singing along to this choir. And you can kind of hear it a little bit in the background. Singing along with this choir. And again, a connection, collaboration of students, adults from all over the world, in a sense of something that we couldn't have done without technology prior. Those of us, 2 or 3 years ago when I showed this video, people were blown away by it. You see this now and you're thinking, yeah, that looks like every Zoom call I've had over the last 3 months. But it is still pretty impressive to think about the level of connection that we can now have. That's kind of that redefining model. I'll end with this last little thing, and it is it's kind of a parent concern. So, as being a tech person, tech leader in a school district, you get a lot of, well, let's just say this, a lot of interesting feedback and opportunities for growth. And so one particular one that I'll share with you is one that kind of surprised me. I was walking out of this, I was in a meeting with a group of parents in our school district, and this parent approached me and she said, I'm just a little bit worried. I'm concerned about, and I was like, I'm kind of in my head imagining what's going to happen. And she's like, it's these iPads. I got to tell you about these devices. And I was like, okay, so something bad's probably happened. Well, so it turns out what she ended up telling me was like, it wasn't bad at all. She said, I just want to tell you about my 4th grader. And so there's her daughter there on the right. And she's 10 years old, but she's an aunt. She has an older sister who lives out of state, who has a nephew who's 2 years old, and his name is Dylan. And one of the things that she mentioned to me was like, Dylan has this, turns out he has a neurodegenerative disorder called Krabbe's disease. And she really wanted to help him. And so she said, Mom, can I go out and do, what most kids do? Like, I'm gonna make a lemonade stand. We're gonna raise some money. There's this help us. You see on the left there, a little friend is holding him sign, help us to support Dylan. And so she creates a sign, and they go out there and they get like, $20 or $30, and like, this isn't what we want to do, Mom. It's not moving the needle. And she goes, Mom, what I want to do is I want to design my own website. And the mom's like, okay, well, so your uncle's, he's a HTML coder. He can help you he builds websites, things like that. And she goes, no, Mom, I got this. And so what she does is she designs using the tool, I think it was Weebly. If you remember Weebly, I think some of you still use that. Weebly's a tool like Wixie, I think someone mentioned in the chat too. And she basically built out her own website. And so she took this and put it on a website. There's a little guy there in the upper left corner. She started a donate button there. And it was like, the idea is, again, to raise awareness of the disease, but also to donate to the larger organization, which is called Hunter's Hope. For those of you that know the ex-NFL quarterback, Jim Kelly, that was his son. And so, again, donating to the cause to really help out. And then what's crazy is she kind of takes this and keeps rolling with it. And so she ends up designing and coordinating traffic patterns throughout the city of Austin and figuring out, like, here's where the best, intersections are, and be sure to come out to this intersection today. And so she's figured out where traffic patterns are as a 10-year-old. And she starts managing multiple teams of people going out and doing physical lemonade stands while also running this website, and was able to raise thousands of dollars in donations to help her nephew. And so I think it goes back to that kind of that whole idea and concept of, what does technology allow us to do? And when you really let kids have that ownership and that control and actually do something for good, it's amazing what they can come up with. So I just like to share that idea. And I do see that Lori says, yeah, she had fourth graders make a class website in Weebly. Yeah, and I think that was what had happened here. The fourth grade teacher had said, we're going to make our own websites. And even though that activity itself is more kind of on the augmentation modification realm, it allowed for what happened to be a redefinition in terms of this. She was able to actually do something that had impact on her immediate family, but also impacted the lives of those around her in the Austin community. And so I think that's a powerful kind of message to kind of take home as well. And so again, redefinition, finally taking that jump in there, right? And there she goes. She's finally jumped in. If those of you that saw the beginning of the presentation, she was on the end of the diving board, but she's finally jumped in. Now, what you don't see here is off onto the side is a coach, right? And I think that's something we also have to think about, those of us that are out there that are coaching our teachers or helping our teachers, to make sure that you're there to support them as well, so they can kind of take that jump. And again, eventually the students are the ones you want to take the jump, and you as a teacher are there to kind of support them as they take that jump as well. I'm going to actually skip to the end here because I knew we were running out of time. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys had any questions. That is swimming in the SAMR swimming pool. And a lot of things, again, I mentioned a lot of these tools. Some of these you guys are aware of. I thank those of you that were in the chat that were interacting and giving us some ideas as well. I noticed Maria put creating infographics is another great way to have students show or design creativity in a way that's not just, again, a typical presentation. I'm always looking for different strategies for that. When I talk to teachers and when I consult with teachers in other districts, I do always, they're always asking me, like, what can I do besides just have the kids make a presentation? So I'm always looking for different ideas. Stop motion is another good one. I've done presentations talking about how stop motion can be a powerful thing. Lots of different ways that kids can actually demonstrate their understanding. And so with that, let me turn off the screen share there. There's my information, by the way, if you guys are interested. I'll just put that up there really quickly again. carlhooker.com, Mr. Hooker on Twitter. And then there's my email, carl@hookertech.com. It's kind of hard to see in the blue water there. But if you have any questions, comments, just ideas, I'm happy to chat with you about any of that. But that is the end of SAMR, swimming in the SAMR swimming pool. And so I'm going to drop out so I can see everybody. And I see lots of different people on the chat. That's great. And a couple of you even joined with camera for a minute, so I do appreciate that. And with that, I will turn off the recording right now.